Hey, what's up, you guys? I am Olivander. I am here to tell you a little story about the wild hunt. So strap in and enjoy.
Imagine you're walking home late at night. It's winter. The village is behind you. The forest is ahead. And then you hear it. First the wind, then the horses. Hooves, dogs, horns, hundreds of them. But there is no road above you, no riders, no army, only the sound. And whatever you do, don't look up. My witches and wizards. Across Europe, people told stories about something very similar. A supernatural procession that crossed the night sky in the darkest part of the year. Sometimes it was led by Odin, sometimes by a mysterious hunter, sometimes by a goddess, sometimes by the dead themselves, and sometimes nobody knew who was leading it. They simply knew one thing: when the hunt came, you stayed inside.
In Norway, it is Oskoreia. In Germany, it is das wütende Heer. In France, it is Mesneux de la Gwynn. In England, it is Herne's Hunt. In Wales, it is Gwynn Anuin. In Ireland, it is Sluach Side. In Scotland, the Sluach. In Galicia, Santa Compana. In Italy, Gaccia Morta. In Poland, Dziki Gon. The Balkans, Civili Love. And across the Atlantic in Quebec, Chasse Galerie. Different names, different gods, different languages, and yet somehow the hunt keeps coming. Across Europe, we find remarkably similar motives: supernatural riders, night processions, storms, the dead, hunting, winter, danger, and the boundary between worlds. But the leaders and the meanings change dramatically from place to place. Oskoreia, or Asgard's Ride, was the Norway's version of the wild hunt and the darker side of Yule. So basically, we don't really know where the etymology of Oskoreia or Asgard Ride comes from. We just know that it means the Ride of the Asgardians, which is linked to Odin and Freyja and all the Viking gods. And the earliest mention we have of Oskoreia in Norway is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle of 793, which suggests a Viking origin. In later times, it is also known as Julereia, which literally means Christmas riders, where we can see the Christian influence on the myth, which got hold later. But the warning to the citizen was clear: prepare to celebrate Christmas, lest you risk being swept along should an Oskoreia or Julereia come your way. That retributive aerial version persisted through the 19th century. And finally, there are traces of the wild hunt or Oskoreia in other Northern European or pre-Christian myths that have survived to this day. The most familiar in the Nordic country is the tradition of the Christmas goat or Yule book in Norway. In Sweden, it's called the Yule book, and in Danish, it's a Juleget. And Olkipuki, I think, in Finnish, yeah. And what was it? Originally a Yule book was a goat slaughtered for Christmas. With time, the word also was implied to a Christmas play based on Oskoreia, and then to the practice of Ga Julebuk, Christmas goat walk, in which masked and costumed people, now usually children, go from door to door singing carols for rewards or sweets. So the warning was clear. Don't go outside, don't look up, and don't answer if it calls your name.
Then the hunt changes, as it so often does. When we go to England, it becomes not Odin or Woden, it becomes Herne the Hunter. Herne the Hunter, he has antlers, he lives in a dark, broody forest most of the time. He's like a spectral being, and has a huge cuppy-up. Because some folklorists have interpreted figures like Herne as a remnant of older supernatural hunting tradition, but folklore doesn't behave like a family tree. They tried to say that he was just basically Odin after Christianization, or after the Christian interpretation of the Wild Hunt. But that merely is only half the story, because it behaves more like a forest, you know? The stories cross paths, but the names disappear, and the characters merge usually, and the old meaning becomes the new one. There are no earlier versions of the Herne story recorded. However, the story Shakespeare relates does have a ring of authentic folklore about it. For example, manifesting at a certain time and place is typical of local legendary specters. Furthermore, appearing at wintertime is usually interpreted as Christmas time, for the play often gets a Yuletide setting, and as has been detailed in other folkloric tradition, traditionally in winter, and in particular the Christmas season, was when most folkloric ghosts go a-hunting. Plus, shaking a chain fits a folkloric pattern too, as well as being a traditional fashion accessory for ghosts, with their worst being from giant as jack-in-irons to various hellhounds and black dogs being set to manifest when the sound of chains and metal rang through the night. But other elements are a little bit off track, to be fair. In particular, causing milk in cows to give blood instead of milk is more usually ascribed to the action of witches, or occasionally fairies than ghosts. Likewise, blasting of trees sounds very much like the traditional storm raising of witchcraft. Hence, there is the possibility that Shakespeare had amalgamated several old legends into one new, Herne-shaped package. It was also Jacob Grimm who postulated that Herne the Hunter might be a figure related to the Wild Hunt, including him in his roundup of spectral hosts, riders and huntsmen. And other writers on the mythology and folklore followed suit. For example, in 1929, writer L. Lowe Thompson, in his book The History of the Devil, linked Herne to both the Wild Hunt and Cernunnos. Not long after, an immediate influence on Carpenter and Cooper was the poet Robert Graves. In his fascinating treatise, The White Goddess, published in 1948, he mentions Herne several times and is common in that work. Finds all manner of connections to different mythology and traditions. Anyway, Herne. Now, neither of our primary sources, Shakespeare or Samuel Ireland, link Herne with the Wild Hunt. However, by the time Graves was writing, there was a strong link between Herne and the Wild Hunt, thanks to Grimm and all those later scholars who embraced the Wild Hunt umbrella. However, Herne's stories has a few more twists and turns and starts to get a little strange. So I implore you to go hunting, babes. And when we go to the Celtic world, it is even more fascinating because here it is Gwynn ap Nudd. And the Welsh tradition gives us a supernatural hunter associated with Annwn, the other world. And his hounds are incredible, girl. They are the Cwen Annwn, or Cwen Annwn, white hounds with red ears and red eyes. And their supernatural bearing is associated with death and the other world. But Gwynn isn't simply the Welsh Odin, he's a figure belonging to a different mythology system altogether. The same shape keeps appearing, a supernatural leader, a supernatural hunt, animals that aren't quite animals, a boundary between the living and the dead, and a warning, don't get caught outside when the worlds are open. Gwynn ap Nudd, he was the king of the Tulip Tech, or the Fair Folk, and the ruler of the Welsh otherworld, Annwn. He was later described as a great warrior with blackened face, maybe a Moor, He was intimately associated with the otherworld in medieval Welsh literature and is associated with the international tradition of the wild hunt. And he is a super important, a new in general, so I would really implore you to go Google it yourself, because Gwynn is an amazing mythology figure. The Woman of the Night. The hunt wasn't always male, though. Medieval sources preserve traditions of night riders led by female supernatural figures, including Diana and Herodias. The canon Episcopi, associated with Regino of Prim around 906, describes women who believed they rode at night with Diana and a supernatural company. Crucially, the text says the journeys were illusions rather than physical events. The church didn't initially say the hunt isn't real and evil. It said something much stranger. The hunt isn't real, but believing that you've ridden with it is a deception. Then later came witch trials, but we'll talk about that in a segment. And now the same general family of night riding beliefs becomes much more dangerous. When the stories enter the courtroom. The Benandanti of Friuli are fascinating. They describe themselves as people whose spirit traveled during certain nights to fight supernatural opponents in defense of their community's craft. They didn't necessarily understand themselves as witches, but inquisitors increasingly interpreted their experience through the framework of witchcraft. Carlo Ginzburg's research on the Benandanti became hugely influential, although some of the broader historical conclusions drawn from the material remain debated. And then there was Konrad Stöcklin, a Bavarian shepherd who described joining a nocturnal night troupe. His testimony was eventually interpreted as witchcraft, and he was executed in 1587. Somewhere along the way, the wild hunt, instead of being a story about gods, it became a story about witches of the church, and then it became evidence against real people. So, as we now have found out, my dear little witches and wizards, there are many variations of the wild hunt. Sometimes it's said that they are roving abroad, hunting down evil spirits and sinners, while other versions have been as demons themselves, pursuing lost souls or even looking to hunt down any passing mortal they encounter. A sighting of the hunt is often a portent of misfortune, sometimes even death. Furthermore, they were often associated with stormy weather, and many traditions state that the hunt rides in wintertime, particularly around Christmas. In similar fashion, we found out that different traditions and regions give the hunt different leaders. Norse gods Odin or Wotan, the angel Gabriel or the devil himself. Sometimes it's some local figure, usually a prominent sinner. In Germany, it is said to one Count Hans von Hochlenberg, doomed to ride forever after hunting on a Sunday. While in Cornwall, the hunt is headed up by young Tree Eagle, a wicked magistrate from Bodmin Moor. Even more confusingly, sometimes it's legendary heroes who lead the hunt: Charlemagne, Frederick, Barbarossa, or King Arthur. And despite hunting traditionally being a male pastime, the hunt has female leaders too: Norse goddess Freyja, Roman goddess Hecate, Germanic goddess Holda or Perchta. Now, the reason the wild hunt is so diverse is because it's in fact merging several strands of folkloric tale under one umbrella term. It was created by Jacob Grimm in his groundbreaking work Deutsche Mythologie, published in 1835. However, conceptualizing the wild hunt, Grimm did amalgamate several separate traditions under the banner of the wild hunt. And again, it is only recently that scholars like Claude Lecoultre and Ronald Hutton have started to untangle them. The current thinking is that the wild hunt includes processions of the dead, legends of doomed or damned huntsmen, and finally, groups of female spirits who gather at night led by a goddess figure. Hence, the wild hunt features such a diverse cast and varies so much in nature. The wild hunt didn't die. The hunt survives in folklore, Christmas or Yule traditions, Perchten, Krampus processions, literature, romanticisms, Wagner, Tolkien, The Witcher, modern paganism. For example, Tolkien was deeply immersed in Old English and Norse and Welsh literature, and the imagery of supernatural riders pursuing the living belongs to the same enormous folkloric landscape that fed later fantasies. We like to think that we've outgrown these stories, that we're too rational now, that we understand the weather, we understand death, we understand the mind, we understand the world, and yet, every winter people still gather in darkness, wearing masks. We still tell stories about things moving through the night. We still hear the wind and imagine something riding inside it. We still turn towards the forest and wonder what's watching us back. Maybe that's why the wild hunt never really disappeared, because the hunt was never only about ghosts. It was about the things that live at the edge of our understanding. Death, winter, the unknown, the wild. The parts of ourselves that civilization never completely domesticated. And perhaps every time we hear hooves in the darkness, some ancient part of us still remembers to go inside, lock the door, turn off the lights, and not look up. Maybe the hunt survived because humans never stopped needing it.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you could like and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you never want to miss a future upload of mine, please also click the bell.